Up to this point, we've been talking about mindfulness meditation, the changes to your brain, both its functioning and its structure, that just 4 days or 8 weeks of mindfulness meditation practice can have. And these are some pretty significant, important changes that could really have a big impact in your life. But when it comes to meditation and what it can really do for us, and how it can really transform our brains and lives, we've only scratched the surface. And that includes, the research that's been done to date. And so now I want to take you beyond mindfulness to intensive practice. So here we're going to talk about the kind of intensive practice that the Dharma brothers did. Not just 15, 25, 40 minutes a day, but setting aside a number of days, even 10 days, to meditate 10 plus hours a day. Now look, I know most of you are not going to run out and do this anytime soon, but some of you may, and it's very important if you want to understand meditation in the brain and how meditation could transform your brain. It's very important to understand what's possible with intensive practice, and that's going to be the rest of the focus of this video. One kind of intensive practice, which the Dharma brothers did, is known as Vipassana, or Vipassana meditation. Now, Vipassana is a word in the language of Pali, which is one of the original languages that the Buddhist teachings were written down in. And what Vipassana means is seeing things as they really are. And as we'll see, there's a variety of different meanings to this, to what it means to truly see things as they really are. One of the ones we can highlight here is it means seeing things not as you are afraid they are, not as you wish they were, but just as they are, without all those projections that we can put on things. This kind of intensive practice is really focused on finding genuine happiness, a really, really profound happiness that just regular mindfulness practice or most other things you could do to try and make yourself happy in life aren't even going to come close. This is about cultivating levels of peace and satisfaction and contentment and wisdom that bring a kind of happiness that few of us actually really get to know and experience, but that is within our reach if we undertake these kind of intensive meditation practices or contemplative practices in other religions too. But here we're focusing on Vipassana meditation, which came from the Buddhist tradition, but which does not require believing Buddhist ideas in order to benefit from the practice. So let's think for a second about the Dharma brothers. Who are these guys? These are people who are in a maximum security prison. These are people who've killed people, who've been participants in murders and robberies and horrible things. And so, if these guys, if they can transform their minds, hearts, and brains, there's hope for all of us. I think that's a really important message here. We may look at ourselves and say, oh, I could never do this intensive meditation practice. I could never find that kind of genuine happiness in my life. That's just for, certain special people. Well, these guys are not so different from the rest of us, and in some ways they've had a lot worse lives and a lot more extreme experiences and have really done some terrible things. And yet they were able to do these practices and get a lot of benefit. So I think it's important to keep that in mind as we move forward through this video. What is intensive Vipassana practice? What did the Dharma brothers do? Well, here's what it looked like. They meditated in silence 10 or more hours a day for 10 straight days. And what does this mean? It means there was no talking, even when they were not meditating. The only exceptions to this were brief conversations they could have with the teachers of the course about specific problems they were having. Otherwise, no talking, certainly no talking to each other. No reading, radio or TV. No calls, texts, or internet. Now obviously prisoners typically don't have access to text or internet, so this would apply to people like us if we were to do one of these intensive retreats. But no distractions basically is what we're getting at here. No talking to anyone, no reading, no communicating with people, no TV, no nothing. Just meditating, sleeping, eating, that's it. For the first 3 days, almost all their time was focused on just attending to their breathing. Everything else was treated as a distraction. Specifically, in this practice, they were focused on the sensations on their upper lip as air passed over it when they breathed in and out. So, 10 hours a day in 45-minute blocks of meditation, they're just attending to these sensations of breathing on their upper lip. And when they find themselves getting distracted by something or caught up in some memories or plans or other default mode stuff, bring your attention back to the breathing. After 3 days of that, it can have a really big effect on your mind and brain, as we'll talk about. And after 3 days of that, the mind can become very calm and able to then engage in the actual Vipassana practice. So the concentration on breathing is just a foundation for the Vipassana practice. It's part of it, but it's more of a foundation. And so after those 3 days of doing that, from days 4 to 10, they move into the Vipassana practice. And that is where they're continually observing any body sensations. One of the ways they accomplish this is by repeatedly doing scans or body scan meditations. So they start at the top of their head and they notice any sensations they feel on the top of their head. And then they slowly move down through their head, their face, their neck and throat, chest, arms, hands, all the way down to the bottom of their feet, scanning those sensations. Now, as they're doing this, of course, other things are arising in their experience. Emotions, impulses, thoughts, memories, and plans. And what they do is they mindfully observe these as they arise and pass away without pushing them away or getting caught up in aversive responses to them, but also without grabbing onto them or clinging to them or getting caught up in seeking and craving in relationship to these experiences. So over and over again, just noticing what sensations are arising in their body as they're scanning through it, and just noticing, without pushing it away or grabbing onto it, whatever thoughts, feelings, and other sensations are arising, moment to moment. Some other things they were doing every day throughout these 10 days is they were listening to teachings that guided their meditation practice. So they were listening to the teachers giving talks, they were listening to certain audio tape recordings of teachings that gave them some concepts to help them focus their attention in certain ways and help them notice what was happening in their experience in ways that would be helpful for the practice. And so that was part of their experience for certain parts of the day. And then also sprinkled throughout each day, they would do meditations that are designed to cultivate experiences of love and compassion. And that was a very, very important part of the retreat also, as we'll hear some of the guys talk about later. So this is what an intensive Vipassana retreat looks like. 10 hours a day for 10 plus days, the first 3 days just focused on those breathing sensations, the rest of the time scanning the body to notice sensations, including very subtle sensations as their attention and awareness becomes more refined, and anything else that's arising in their experience moment to moment, as well as getting some teachings to help them do this more effectively, and doing some meditations on love and compassion. Here we see some Dhamma brothers doing this practice, seeing into how their brain operates and how they relate to their experience in a totally new way. Let's focus in more on this concentration on the breath, what they were doing for those first 3 days, and how that looks in terms of these brain circuitries that we've been talking about here. Beginning concentration practice, here we're talking about maybe the first day or day and a half, what was going on for people as they were trying to focus on these sensations of breathing. So here we have in yellow this deliberate attention. They were trying to focus on their breathing sensations. And the deliberate attention is in yellow because that's about the executive circuitry that allows us to focus our attention where we want to. And the sensations of breathing are in the orange because that's about the embodiment circuitry, which allows us to be aware of those sensations. And so in the beginning practice, the executive circuitry is trying to shine a spotlight on those sensations of breathing and what's happening in the embodiment circuitry, but it's a pretty weak spotlight. And so what's happening is you've got all this distracting stuff, thoughts, plans, memories, things we want, things we're afraid of or don't want in our lives. All that default mode stuff is interfering with your ability to focus on your breathing. This is what it's like to begin these practices. So you're trying to focus on those sensations of breathing on your upper lip, but all this other stuff keeps popping into your awareness, keeps distracting your attention and carrying you away. As we can see, the circuitry of seeking and the circuitry of fear and aversion are really dominating your experience at this point. You're trying to use your executive circuitry to focus on the breathing, but the things you want and don't want just keep popping into your head. All those typical default mode thoughts and memories and everything. But what's happening as you're doing this over and over again, treating that other stuff as distraction and coming back to those breathing sensations over and over again for hours a day, as you do this, you're quieting those circuitries of seeking and aversion. You're not feeding those flames. And by continually doing this, you end up quieting them down. And this is something that if you do these practices that you can see for yourself in your experience. So as you get better at doing this, and you're quieting down the seeking and the fear and aversion, and you're getting better at focusing on your breathing sensations, well, what does that look like? Right? Well, so your executive circuitry is working better. It's focusing a stronger spotlight on the sensations of breathing. But you still got these distracting things. You still got that default mode circuitry active. You still got those thoughts and plans and memories and all the fantasies and hopes you have about the things you want and the worries you have about the things you fear. All that stuff is still pushing into awareness, but not as much as before. And so what's happening is as you progress through the practice, maybe the end of the first day or halfway through the second day or in the third day of this intense concentration practice, you're getting better at remembering to focus on the breathing sensations. You're getting better at monitoring the quality of your attention, how well you are focusing on those things, how good you are at not letting that other stuff pull your attention away. And those distractions, those wants and fears are getting weaker. And what that means for the brain is that you're quieting those circuitries of seeking and aversion. And that's what's happening for this Dhamma brother. He's quieting those circuitries of seeking and aversion and getting better and better at focusing on those sensations of breathing. And so what does it look like after you've been doing this for 3 days? This is advanced concentration practice. Now, the executive circuitry is very strongly focused on the sensations of breathing. They're very clear and vivid, and the thoughts and plans and memories and the wants and the fears, that stuff is weak, and it's not even getting in anymore. It's really quite an amazing experience to have, to just focus on those sensations of breathing and have all this other stuff just drop away. And so when that happens, those sensations become very vivid and stable. And all the default mode stuff and the activity of the seeking circuitry and the fear circuitry becomes calmer, weaker, quieter, even at times silent. And this is a huge shift in one's experience and in the functioning of your brain. And so let's hear a little bit about how this affected one of the Dahmer brothers doing this practice, what it was like for him. This is Edward Johnson. Ed was a guy who was feared by a lot of prisoners. He was kind of an enforcer involved in gang activity, and he was the one who would crack some heads if people got out of line in terms of the rules of the gang. And so here, Big Ed is talking about his experience of doing this concentration practice, Anapanasati. And I'm going to read something that he wrote about this. On the first day, I was just breathing like I always do. On the second day, sitting on that mat for 10 hours, I learned Anapana really well. On the third day, I began to feel calm. And then and there, for the first time in my life, I was ready, really ready to deal with Edward Johnson. A lot of guys were afraid to deal with Big Ed, but now I was ready to take him on, right on that meditation mat. And so what we see here as people shift from those first 3 days of focusing on the mindfulness of sensations of breathing to days 4 through 10, where they're scanning through their body, noticing sensations, but also noticing thoughts and feelings that are arising and how these things are connected to each other, this leads to insight. This leads to really seeing how your brain is operating to either cause you pain and suffering, or to help you feel happy and content, and satisfied in your life. Now let's hear from another Dharma brother, Milton Lucas, in his own voice, about that shift from the concentration practice to the Vipassana practice, with scanning through the body, noticing sensations, as they arise in the body, as they arise with thoughts and memories, whatever comes and goes.
It was like mental exercise for me. My whole mind was awakening to my body, its surroundings. It's like my mind had been asleep or something dormant in me had just started waking up a little bit at a time. And that was the first 3 days, and it started on day one. So as he's talking and he's describing the operations of the mind and the sankharas, past events, things we've held on to, things that come up, and a lot of time we respond to them, and that creates more sankharas or more problems, more roots. The roots keep growing. And as I looked at it, I'm saying, hey, I'm understanding this. This is what I was wondering. Where is this coming from? He's giving me the answer. By the time Vipassana came on day 4, it was just something all the way new. From other meditations where you would body scan and so forth, this here was a step higher. It was a step higher in the degree of sensitivity. You know, I mean, we do the visualization and we do the body scan and so forth, and I really feel that I get into that. But then to sit here and do Vipassana, and you're feeling, you're actually feeling, these different various sensations, and you're not causing them. You're just observing them. And that is something serious when you come to the point of observation.
We can understand what Milton is talking about in terms of brain processes, particularly in terms of automatic brain processes which happen within half a second of our brain registering any kind of sensation. And when I say registering here, I mean not registering consciously, not things we're necessarily consciously aware of. In fact, usually all this stuff is happening in the background and we're not aware of it. And what Vipassana meditation allows us to do is to get inside that half second and see what's going on in our brain. So here's how it unfolds. We have some sort of sensation. It could be of a sight, it could be of a sound, it could be body sensations that go with an emotion or an impulse to do something or some sort of urge. It could be the body sensations that go with a memory or a fantasy or some plan we're making for the future, those default mode things. Whenever these are registered by our brain, again, typically without us even being aware of it, automatically, within about an eighth of a second, these sensations get tagged as positive, neutral, or negative, mostly based on past experience. Then, again, within fractions of a second after that, all within a half second, if it was tagged positive, then a motivation of wanting and seeking arises. And as we know, and the reason why it's in green here, well, that's the seeking circuitry kicking into action. On the other hand, if it's tagged as negative, whatever the sensation might be, then automatically, within that half second, aversion and the motivation to avoid are arising, and that fear and aversion circuitry are kicking in. And so what Vipassana allows you to do is by calming your mind, quieting the seeking and aversion circuitries, you can get inside this half second and you can observe sensations that you had never noticed, and you can observe how those are linked to these taggings of emotional significance, positive or negative, and then the motivation kicking in. And this opens up the opportunity to change the way you relate to your experience. Let's look at how Vipassana can allow you to see the chains of conditioning that bring suffering and that you can overcome. So as we've said before, anything that you sense, whether it's a sight or a sound or something you touch or something happening in your body, or also an image in your mind or a memory or a thought, automatically these get tagged as neutral, pleasant, or unpleasant within an eighth of a second. Now here we're going to focus on the pleasant and unpleasant taggings of emotional significance and where they go. So what happens next is, based on those sensations being evaluated as pleasant or unpleasant, automatically, again within hundreds of milliseconds, you have a conditioned habitual reaction which activates either the seeking circuitry or the circuitry of aversion. So if it's the seeking circuitry, you get craving, maybe wanting to hold on to, wanting to get more of. If it's the aversion circuitry, you've got that aversion, wanting to push away, wanting to have less of that experience, whether it's an external or an internal experience. And then based on that, those craving feelings or those aversive impulses, they also have sensations associated with them, pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant. And again, we're going to focus on pleasant and unpleasant because this is the cascade, these chains of conditioning. They keep us wrapped up in our habitual responses and prevent us from finding contentment and peace and happiness. And so those sensations lead to new conditioned reactions of seeking and aversion. And it just spirals and spirals and spirals. And this is what Vipassana, after you've calmed your mind and been able to attend to what's happening inside that very early automatic processing, this is what you can see. You can see how pleasant and unpleasant lead to seeking and aversion, which themselves are associated with pleasant and unpleasant sensations, which lead to more seeking and aversion. And you can observe this stuff as it's happening, moment by moment, without getting carried away by any of it. We can break this down in an even more fine-tuned way, the kind of insights and opportunities for making new choices that Vipassana can bring. So again, it starts with perceiving a sensation or an object or a thought or a memory or a behavior that someone else has done or something they said to you that's registered by your brain, and automatically those sensations get tagged as positive or negative. They get this evaluation of their emotional significance within an eighth of a second. And based on that, the seeking circuitry kicks in with some craving or aversion. Flowing from that are more complex emotional responses. Response options of, do I yell, do I run away, do I look the other way, do I try to focus my mind on something else? Some sort of motivated behavior, either acting on the world or acting on your own experience to try and get what you want or get away from what you don't want. And this includes impulsive things that can pop up very, very quickly. And then, with Vipassana, you can see the stage at which your brain evaluates those options. Saying this, doing that, thinking this, grasping for this, pushing that away. It evaluates those as positive or negative. And with those evaluations, then come the intention to take action. Again, either actual action of saying or doing something, or a more subtle action that you take in relation to your own thoughts or feelings. And finally, with Vipassana, you can see that last stage where you decide whether or not you are going to release that action that has become an option to you and has some motivational oomph to it, we could say. And what Vipassana allows you to do is it allows you to perceive each of these processing stages. Again, these are taking place within less than a second. And you can see each of these things happening when you're engaged in this intensive practice. You can understand the links between these very rapid and subtle stages of brain processing. This is how you come to understand the chains that bind you to suffering and how to break those chains and become a much happier person. And finally, when you can see this stuff unfolding, you get to choose not to engage in habitual chain reactions and not to have the suffering that they bring. And this is the promise of Vipassana, that you can really see how your brain operates, usually automatically outside of your awareness, so it's already too late by the time you've done that thing or said that thing or related to your emotions in a way that actually isn't helpful and is just causing more suffering. Vipassana lets you see inside that and make other choices. And what I've just described in great detail, and in a way that you can relate to the brain circuitries we've been talking about, Dharma brother Grady Bankhead puts in pretty simple terms that we can all relate to. But it's important to know that what's behind what he's saying are the things that I was just talking about.
It gives you the opportunity to slow your reaction down to where you can make a conscious choice if you want to react to something. And that's what, to me, the practice of Vipassana is.
Now let's hear from Sheldon Paget, who goes into a little more detail and has a really nice baseball metaphor that he uses.
A baseball coach, he used to say when the ball is hit to the outfield, you're supposed to take a step back as opposed to taking a step forward to go to the ball. And when you react to the ball, you take a step back first so you can observe where the ball going and run under it or run left or right. Instead of when you run forward first, it's harder, the momentum to turn and stop and go a different direction. And that came to my mind when I was on the mat observing myself and listening to what Goenka was saying about you got to observe the sensations that you get from certain things and to not react.
Here are a few review questions that you can use to reflect on and better absorb what we've just covered.